Okay, thanks everyone. Um, as some of you may recall, a couple of issues of the DO, my friend Joel Morris, also an O&W modeler, talked about his approach to modeling the O&W. The O&W has been my favorite road for a long time, but I didn't really want to model a specific location. Too many nitpickers saying this wasn't here, that wasn't there. So I decided to take a proto-freelance route. Okay, why aren't you moving? There we go. The Ontario and Western was the largest Class 1 railroad to go totally abandoned in 1957, the first one. But it ran from Weehawken, New Jersey, up the West Shore, and then swung on its own track through Middletown, through Norwich, and up to Oswego in Lake Ontario. It had some branches. A major branch ran down to the Scranton area. Come on, move. The original New York and Oswego, Midland, Auburn branch, which was the predecessor to the O&W, began service in 1866. And this red dot here is Norwich, same as we saw on the other map. This was the main line up to Oswego. And it built a branch, or it projected a branch from Norwich over toward Lake Erie to capture some of the Great Lakes trade that couldn't get through the Niagara Falls area before the canals. This dark green line that you see here is the proposed route of what they call the Auburn branch. Unfortunately, when it was built, it followed the projection up to DeRuyter, but then instead of going across, it took the most circuitous route down toward Ithaca, New York, and up toward my hometown of Auburn. It actually stopped 14 miles south of Auburn, never quite made it there until the railroad was went bankrupt in 1879. The Ontario and Western assumed the railroad in 1880, but it never operated the Auburn branch. In my world, in order to be able to model something that really was almost projected, I proto-freelanced it close to the original surveys, and you can see the gold line. This is my proposed route to Niagara Falls instead of Buffalo. The Midland had a penchant for ignoring cities who wouldn't bond themselves to buy stock in the railroad. So they would just go around to any communities that would, which is why we ended up going down toward Ithaca and then back north again. So my planning considerations were, I consider it a relatively small layout. It's a single level, reusing part of previous bench work. It's staging to staging. The towns are close together, unfortunately. Time periods 1948 to 54. I wanted enough variety to make it fun. I like switching, so I wanted to have enough switching in there, but I also wanted to simulate the prototype operations and infrastructure as they would have been in my 48 to 54 time period. And then I also wanted to operate it as close to the prototype as I could. So here's a diagram of the layout. You can see it's about 50 feet along the long axis and about 24 feet this way. We start in Norwich, which is the lower level. You can see here, there are 8 staging tracks. The trains are staged there and come out at various times during the op sessions. They then proceed out of the hidden staging into Auburn, and this is the Auburn yard. It's a 3-track yard, caboose track, engine track, and there's some industries up here as well. We swing around to Montezuma, which is over in this direction. This is the line coming up from staging, past the depot, over to Montezuma, non-agency station, and then on into Newark, which is the largest intermediate station on the Auburn Division, as I call it now, because this became the main line and the line to Oswego became a secondary route. From Newark, we go to Palmyra. This is Palmyra down here. And then way in the corner is Macedon. And we swing around from Macedon, coming down through what on my, this was originally an SN3 Colorado layout. This was supposed to be the Taylor River Gorge, and I couldn't stand to take out all those rock castings, so it now became the Genesee Gorge south of Rochester. Rochester not bonding itself to the railroad. So here's the gorge and the approach into Niagara Falls Yard. This is the roundhouse area and the Niagara Falls Yard, 5 tracks, stub end. And then we go through the wall to what was the original staging on the layout. It was originally 4 staging tracks, but would only let me hold 8 cars, which was really a small train for my symbol freights. So now it holds interchange trains, live interchange trains. We go across a removable bridge and into the Fort Erie / Niagara Falls Depot staging tracks, 7 tracks here. And so we start trains from both ends of the railroad. There's also a branch to Naples. There are 2 removable bridge sections which connect with the main line at Newark and go down to Naples, which is a modified time saver. So, as I say, I wanted to follow what the prototype did in its operations as much as I could. So we have symbol freights, which are the through freights. We have a milk train, had to have a milk train, 1 passenger train each way. We have pickups, which is O&W parlance for way freights. We have some extras. And we have switchers, regular yard switchers in Niagara Falls and Auburn, and also a local switcher in Newark to help get the through freights down the line faster. So let's talk about the trains. Symbol freight routes were primarily between Coxton Yard outside of Scranton and either Maybrook for interchange with the New Haven or down the West Shore to Weehawken. And there were several trains that went to New England. Some of them were called the banana train for bananas heading west, and the beefers for meat coming from the Midwest heading to New England and New York. There were other non-local trains which were designated as symbols, but didn't compromise the bridge route concept that kept the O&W in solvency. Mostly it was generalized merchandise traffic, but a high amount of meat and produce. The symbol freights only dropped off or picked up blocks of cars at certain stations where there were switch crews. So that let me give the symbol freights, which normally would run from Niagara Falls to Norwich or vice versa, with nothing in between, it gave those operators something to do as they went north or south. Now, the O&W started using the symbol freights in the 1920s, running between major terminals. And you can see here's a fast freight schedule from 1926, connections with the New Haven, the Lackawanna, Nickel Plate, the Wabash. We had our own kind of alphabet route in terms of freight traffic. With the advent of traffic to New England, the larger symbol freights ran, as I said, between Coxton Yard up the Scranton branch and then the main line to Campbell Hall, where there was a short run to New Haven Yard at Maybrook. And then the New Haven took it across the Poughkeepsie Bridge and on into the Boston area. So I could model the prototype trains pretty easily. Here's a picture of a northbound symbol freight coming out of Middletown Yard, and I can almost duplicate it car for car if I wanted to. And that's something I wanted to do. I wanted to try and follow the prototype operation as closely as I could. Northbound trains are staged in Norwich. Southbound trains are staged in Fort Erie. With the Auburn Division having become the main line, the symbol freights come from a connection with the Canadian National and the Wabash in Fort Erie, Ontario. And I was lucky to find that the Wabash actually did use the Canadian National Yard in Fort Erie for its trains that were coming from the Chicago area. So for example, we start the session off with train FW2, which runs from Fort Erie to Weehawken and arrives in Niagara Falls with Canadian National power and caboose. And then it's swapped for O&W power and caboose. Southbound train CB4 from Chicago via the Wabash arrives in Niagara Falls with Wabash power and caboose. And they're swapped for O&W power and cabooses. Train WC1, which is a perishable train, and its opposite CW2, use O&W power both ways between Norwich and Fort Erie. If I need to, I can run additional symbol freights between Niagara Falls and Norwich to kind of balance out the cars that are in the yard. The milk trains ran until 1948 on the O&W from far upstate New York and the Scranton branch down to Weehawken. So I just had to have a milk train. So here we see milk train 13 running northbound out of Auburn to Niagara Falls. And here it's stopping in Newark. It's finished its work picking up milk cars. It'll make another stop in Macedon, and it will terminate in Niagara Falls. Southbound milk train 14 runs late at night and leaves empty cars at the dairies and just terminates in Auburn on the main line as the last train of the day. The milk trains begin and terminate on the main line at the beginning or end of a session day. Passenger trains, the Chicago Limited was a train that actually ran on the O&W via the Wabash. It came up the West Shore line in Earlville, New York, and ran out to Buffalo, where it then on the RW&O, where it connected with its counterpart, the New York Limited, heading southbound. My version runs between Norwich staging and the depot track in the Fort Erie staging area. The trains do switch head-end cars in Auburn with intermediate station stops in Newark and Macedon. A pickup was the O&W's term for a local, and it ran out of many locations on the line. In steam days, these would have been small locomotives, 460s, 260s, 280s, and in diesel years, a lot of those are running with NW2s. There are pickups that run in both directions between Auburn and Niagara Falls. Switching is needed in between. The Naples pickup runs from Auburn to Newark, and then in conjunction with the Newark Switcher, it has to reverse the makeup of its train, swap the position of the engine and the caboose, and pick up more cars that were left in Newark to go down to Maples. And it heads down to Naples, which is, I say, a modified time saver plan. When it's done, comes back to Newark, drops off cars for mainline trains to pick, and heads back to Auburn. This job, with all of the movements needed both in Naples and in Newark can take a crew anywhere between 45 minutes and an hour. So this is a job that all the crews like to get if they can. The Norwich pickup runs from staging to Norwich staging up to Auburn. It switches the lower level industries in Auburn and then takes its train up into the yard, where at the end of the session, it will then take cars back south as needed. The O&W's trains were not necessarily big trains. As I said, NW2s on a pickup were not unusual. Passenger trains were not big. We have some extra trains that we run. The rock train serves only the Reinhold Stone Quarry. So this will bring empties out of either Norwich or Niagara Falls, depending on the day. And it will pick up the loads at the Reinhold Stone in Palmyra and take the cars to the opposite end, spot the empties. Now, this is one of the head scratchers for a lot of people, because on a northbound rock train, there is one of the two tracks in the loader is a stub end track. So you can't take an engine underneath the tipple. So you have to figure out how to get those cars out of the second track, get them onto your train, and then get the empties into that second track without pushing any cars ahead of you between stations and without dropping any cars at stations and running ahead and trying to do the switching. And here you see Larry Sitch, who on his first time on this job did an exemplary job of getting that work done. There's also a regular coal train that runs loaded northbound out of Norwich and empty southbound out of Niagara Falls. It'll run loaded at the beginning of a day and run empty at the end of a day. Periodically, a main or military train run as an extra. This could be either all Pullmans or just equipment cars. This doesn't happen very often because there's not a lot of track to store a 7 or 8 car Pullman train in any of the staging yards. We can also run work extra between Niagara Falls and Auburn. Have them give them orders to stop at various places and wait, theoretically doing work along the way. Other extras can be run depending on the session time and the cars that need to be cleared from one of the yards. There are 8 live interchange trains that help to move the cars on and off the main part of the railroad. And it also gives me the chance to have different motive power, different paint schemes, and a little something different for the operators. Auburn has a Lehigh Valley and a New York Central interchange. You can see that coming into the Auburn yard between the Columbia Rope buildings. Newark has a Pennsylvania Sodus Branch interchange. It hides in staging and comes on into Newark. It actually comes onto the O&W main. It will drop off its block of cars and pick up cars that are going to the Pensy. And again, the position of the locomotive and the caboose, and there's also a combine on this train. They all have to be moved around. So that gives the Newark switchman and the Pennsylvania crew a little bit of fun work to do at the same time of keeping out of the way of other trains. Niagara Falls has interchanges with the Lehigh Valley. There are 2 different trains, the Erie, the Canadian National, and the New York Central. The Lehigh Valley and the Erie trains actually run between 2 separate interchange staging tracks, and they are set up with 8 cars in a train. 4 cars will be dropped off, 4 cars will stay on. We will go to the opposite end, interchange staging. And when all the operations are done for a day, then the next time that train runs, all I have to do is switch the engine and caboose positions, and the other 4 cars in that train will get dropped off for the O&W. As I said, there's switchers located in Auburn and Niagara Falls to handle the pickups that come in or depart, and to receive and deliver cars for the symbol freights. They have to get the cars ready to be picked up in blocks, get them in the correct station order so they can be added to the symbols as they're arriving in their towns. The Newark Switcher, which you can see below, the maroon switcher, works the symbol freights, dropping and picking up cars, and handles all facing point moves for the pickups. The only reason that they handle the facing point moves is because this is a bottleneck in the middle of the railroad, and it saves a lot of time to not have to have the road crews do the facing point moves. Niagara Falls has a north switcher, which sorts inbound and outbound cars in the north yard, and a south switcher that actually works with the symbol freights and the interchange cars to swap their cars, as well as servicing some of the local industries in Niagara Falls. The employee timetable contains rules, signal indications, train descriptions. Actually, most of the rules are right out of the 1913 O&W rule book, which was the newest full volume rule book that the O&W had. The same thing with the signal diagrams. It also includes descriptions of the trains, information about the siding lengths, passing siding lengths, and so forth. The crews use NCE radio throttles under the direction of a dispatcher. The actual timetable in the schedule isn't quite ready for prime time. I haven't been able to time out the first class train, which is really just the 2 passenger trains, but I could also make the milk trains a second class train with a time schedule, but I haven't timed it out to actually use a fast clock schedule for them. So if you're ever come up here and operate, you're going to see a full timetable with times, but they don't really mean anything yet. Wait for the next edition. Thanks to Harold Crewer, who did a presentation on TTTO at the RPM in Chicago several years ago. It got myself and my friend Pete Reinhold and Keith Thompson to think about using train orders and going to a full TTTO experience. So we don't have the TT yet, but we started using Form 19s. We don't use clearance cards. We just use the Form 19s. Clearance is by phone with the dispatcher. A day is 3.5 hour operating sessions, starting at 5:30 a.m. Scale time. So we have the blocks of trains broken down into 3 separate sessions in order to complete a theoretical 24-hour period. The milk train and 2 symbol freights begin the sessions, and because it's 5:30 in the morning to pick up the milk early, we start in the dark. All that's on are strings of blue Christmas lights up in the ceiling, which once your eyes get used to it is kind of neat to see the headlights going around the layout. However, the crews have not been happy about that. While they have flashlights, some of them have gone to wearable headlights in order to see what they're doing and read their paperwork. Crews get their clearance, as I said, from the dispatcher by phones at open agency stations, which are Norwich, Auburn, Newark, Macedon, Niagara Falls, and Fort Erie. As all of us have probably experienced, crews are supposed to OS, but they often do not, and suddenly they're at another station, and it's like, how did you get there? It's a learning curve. The crews are assigned so that each crew has an opportunity to do some switching. So with symbol freights, they'll do some switching at Niagara Falls, at Newark, and at Auburn. And the pickups will stop wherever they are needed to do their switching. Crews are ideally 8 to 12 people. That's including the dispatcher. There's 2 assistant yard masters and a yard master in Niagara Falls. The assistants, one runs the north yard, one runs the south yard, and the main yard master lines up the work, gives each assistant the instructions as to what their next job is. There is the switch crew in Newark, and then there is the yard master in Auburn, who has a lot of industries to switch and also assists with not only the symbol freights dropping off or picking up blocks of cars, but also has to help the northbound passenger train do its head-end switching because it's a facing point move for that train. The crews are assigned first in, first out. So I'll assign each of 3 mainline crews their initial job, and then whoever gets in first takes the next train out. It's a train sequence rather than, as I said, strictly timetable. Some of the guys like one-man crews for the road crews. Some like 2-man crews. When you get to do the Naples pickup, handling the paperwork and the throttle and uncoupling the switches, that job works a lot better with a 2-man crew. I'm getting ahead of myself. 1 yard master in Auburn, as I said, switch foreman in Newark, 2 assistants in Niagara Falls. I use Shenware car cards and waybills for my car routing. I started out many years ago. I don't know if any of you know the name Waddy House. He was an O-gauger up in Connecticut. He had a very simple system with an index card and station names and a paper clip that you slid down the index card to move the car along. That was my introduction to operation in the 60s. I tried RailOp, wasn't happy with that. I used, the other one. Can't think of it right now. But Switch It. Number of guys here use Switch It. It wouldn't do what I wanted it to do. So I went to, when I was at Mike Rixdorf's outside of Chicago, he used these types of cards, and it was my first exposure to them. And then I had the opportunity to operate on Bruce Chubb's layout. And after reading his 40-page instruction manual, which a lot of it had to do with the car cards, and it started to make sense on how they were being used. So I've adopted that system with some differences the way Mike and Bruce use it. I do have a train card for each train, gives the train designation, the maximum number of cars at the terminal, not how many it can run in between terminals, but because of the length of staging tracks in Norwich, 12 cars is the maximum for the freights. Gives some information about the work that it does on the line, and for the symbols, it tells them what track they terminate on. Then there's a locomotive card, and I like to put the pictures on. Some people are more visual, so it's easier for them to see what they're looking for. It will have the road type on it. The TE, the tractive effort, is the maximum number of cars for that locomotive. And for the mainline locomotives, that is dictated by the 3% grade left over from narrow gauge days that I should have taken out. Cabooses also have a card, and they also have a waybill slip that I use so that when cabooses come into a yard and they're on the front end of the caboose track, they aren't automatically picked as the next caboose to go out. They have to rotate by the cycle number on the waybill. Now these, Peter White, who developed the Shenware card system, took his website down. So if you're interested in finding more about this system, his phone number, the easiest thing to do is give him a phone call, and he can tell you how to get a beta copy of his software that you can play with and see how it works. Car cards have, of course, the car type, initial, and road number. They have a picture of the card, and then they'll have the four-sided waybills. The cars also have empty car routing on the car card itself. You can't see it in these pictures, unfortunately, but it'll tell you to route the car north or south or to a particular destination. I was finding that trying to take cars on and off the railroad, but still use the four-card cycle, was sending the same cars to the same industries all the time, or having the car on the wrong end of the railroad for the next part of the waybill cycle. So I'm still toying with going to two-sided waybill, two-position waybills, or maybe just one-position waybills. Tony Thompson will hate me for not doing real waybills. The one thing about the Shenware is you can put color codes as to destinations. So you'll see the Pensy box car there on the waybill. The station name Newark is in red. That helps the crews know that in their train, any cars that they have with a red destination on their waybill go to Newark. So they know when they get to Newark, they've got to drop those cars off. There's also an option on the software for a via designation. Shenware has used the OPSIG industry database as part of its industry listings. The only problem is when you use the OPSIG database in the software, the header of the waybill is white, as you can see on the Swift Reefer going to Burlington, Vermont. The problem I found with that is you don't know, and believe me, some of my operators have said, really? I don't know which way Burlington, Vermont is from Niagara Falls. So you can't tell whether that car would be going south to go to a Maybrook connection, to go to New England, or north to go to some other connection and head further west. What do? That's why I use the VIA. And the VIA uses the same color codes for different locations, so that if you have, in this instance of the Swift car, the VIA band is orange, any car with an orange band means it's going south. Now, certainly to get to Burlington, Vermont, it has to go farther than my layout runs. But all you have to know is that orange is south, regardless of whether it says Maybrook or Weehawken or any other place south off the layout, it's going to go into Norwich staging for the end of the line. That's also useful if you have industries that are on an interchange in a town that's on your railroad, but not served by your railroad. So in the Canadian National Waybill, you'll see Auburn, which is on my railroad, and which normally would have that tan colored bar, is in white, meaning it's not part of my operating layout. So uh, in the via line, it says this is going to the Lehigh Valley in Auburn. So when that car gets into Auburn, the yardmaster can look at that and say, wait a minute, Auburn, that's white. And I don't have American Locomotive Company on the layout. Where does this go? Oh, it goes to the Lehigh Valley in Auburn. Now this is a little different than the way Mike and Bruce use them. They use them, the color codes, to go to intermediate terminals on their railroads. So if this was Bruce Chubb's layout, that Swift reefer would go to some intermediate terminal, and then the yardmaster there would have to figure out what car to put that train in to get to its final destination. My railroad's not big enough to do that, so I use the color codes for each station on the railroad. Now, we do have the Finger Lakes Canning in Newark, which ships frozen foods. We have some other industries that might use a reefer now and then. So any reefers that are going to Finger Lakes to get loaded with frozen food, or any cars that are loaded at Finger Lakes and are heading back north to go further west on the Wabash or the CN or someplace else, they have to stop at the icing station in Niagara Falls. So whether there's a waybill for a loaded car or an empty car that's eventually going to one of the industries, and it has to be iced, I have a little pink icing card that I slip in ahead of any waybill. And when that car gets into Niagara Falls, rather than continuing on from there, it goes into the icing station and doesn't move for the rest of that operating session. Before the next operating session, I'll go around and pull those ice cards, and that car can then move after the next session starts. Each station has a diagram on the fascia with the tracks, the industries located, the passing tracks, the north-south direction, and the color code for the waybills, so that if they don't remember that Newark is red, all they've got to do is look at the label on the fascia and they'll see exactly where they have to drop their cars. Most waybills aren't rotated until after the third day session. As I said, a day is 3 operating sessions. So if the cars are dropped off in the first session, for the most part, they're going to stay where they are until 2 more sessions are completed and we're on a new day. Each crew gets a switch list, and I only use this for cars that are being set out by that particular train. So you can see here BC1, which is a northbound symbol freight. It's got 2 cars for Auburn, which is AU. It's got 1 car for Newark and 3 cars for Niagara Falls. And this is an actual O&W form I've reduced. I have encouraged the guys to, as I think Steve Sandifer mentioned along the way, or someone who did a clinic here recently, the crews should be writing down the cars that they pick up and where they're going to be dropped off. I haven't quite gotten them to do that yet, but we're working on it. I also had a problem with some cars never moving out of the yard if I let the yard masters decide which cars they were going to add to certain trains. So before an operating session, I will go along and decide which cars are going to move out this particular session and which cars are going to stay where they are so that every car gets moved. Bob Welke introduced me to a system that he uses where in his card boxes, he has a hold tab so that any new cars arriving, their cards go behind the hold tab and the yard master doesn't look at those the rest of that session. And then he'll come along and move them up into the active part of the box so that they can be used the next time. And that has helped greatly in keeping cars moving around the layout. Trains are left where they are at the end of a session, and maybe I might actually get to run a train, as most of you probably do. You don't get to run a train on your own railroad when you're in an op session, since I have to dispatch most of the time. The coal and rock extras are turned and loaded or unloaded between sessions. Unique trains like the mains are taken off the layout completely or put on the layout to be used during a potential session. And my friend Pete Reinhold, who's been helping me with this railroad for over 10 years now, and a couple of the other guys will have a post-mortem at the end of the session to talk about what went well and what didn't. Unfortunately, a lot of the people around my area are not really into completely emulating the railroad experience. And that makes it a little frustrating at times. All the locomotives have sound. I want them to use whistle signals. I want them to know the headlight rule when they're meeting a train. It doesn't always work, and we're always looking for some good operators. I'm happy to have Larry and Mark Van Cleven come to the last session from the operating-sessions.com website that I posted. So what have I accomplished? Well, I've set up a railroad that is in part real, but part a freelance what would have happened if they'd have really finished what they started doing. I've built in the types of trains, the symbol freights. I've tried to provide enough switching so the guys can have fun doing the switching and not just running trains back and forth. Some variety with milk trains. There aren't too many milk trains out there. Head-end switching on the passenger trains. Some complex switching with the time saver. And the guys seem to have fun, and I have fun, but it's still a work in progress. And it's always great to look at a prototype, even if you're not modeling the exact operation. You can use the same schemes and the same types of operations to make it fun, like the real thing might have been. Thanks for listening. My Facebook page is O&W Auburn Division. My website is contract.railfan.net. And my email's down there if you have any questions. And thanks for listening.
All right, Ken, thanks so much for presenting. We appreciate it. Cal had a question. Are you HO scale?
Yes.
Okay. That was actually the only question so far. If anybody else has questions, please put them in the chat. We thank you for presenting. Well, not a lot of questions today. So I've turned off the, there's one. How long are your sessions?
About 3.5 to 4 hours, depending on how long the guys want to stay.
Yep. It's all a matter of how long the back and the legs will hold out in most cases.
Yeah. Well, I use those rubber tiles, interlocking tiles for the floor. But one
He's
thing
muted.
I found with those is in the wintertime, when the humidity is low, you do not want to walk across.
Eric,
the rubber
he's
floor,
muted.
And
No, it's not, Frank.
you don't want to touch your signals because the static electricity will blow out your LEDs. Don't ask me how I know.
Oh, yeah. Humidifiers are a good thing. Burr is asking, which part of Shenware did you use for the instruction cards?
Oh, I actually, that's not in Shedware. That is just something I did in Microsoft Word.
Okay. Do you rely on the car cards or the switch lists, and how are the two interfaced?
Well, the car cards set up where the cars are supposed to go, and I will write the switch list out at the beginning of the session for cars that are already in the train. And then when for example, when a symbol would pick up cars in Niagara Falls, that's where I said they really should be writing in the cars that they pick up and where they're going, so that they always have a complete list of what cars they're going to have to switch in between. I don't list the cars that are going all the way to the staging on the other end because they don't need to worry about those.
Got it. Let's see. How many total cars and engines are on the layout during a session?
There's probably about 150 cars, 150, 200 cars on the layout, and more locomotives than I have room for because I hide them back in the Fort Erie staging. So the roundhouse has got 6 tracks and they're usually full. There's usually six trains in each staging yard, and then some other power. There's 2 or 3 engines in Auburn, and then the switchers in the yards and in Newark. So, probably 20 something are on the layout at any one time.
A goodly number. All right. And somebody is suggesting for static control, you can also spray a fine mist of Downy and water on the rubber mats. Rick's asking, how are your crew assignments done?
I try to keep track of who had what jobs the previous session so that one person isn't always getting symbol freights where all they're doing is dropping and picking up blocks. So the first trains out, I will assign one crew to the milk train, one crew to the northbound symbol, one crew to the southbound symbol. And then whoever gets in first gets the next train in line, whatever that is. The road engineers will obviously run the pickups, but they also run the live interchanges in Niagara Falls and the Pensy interchange in Newark. The yardmaster in Auburn runs the 2 interchanges there because they're not easily accessible from the aisle.
Got it.
Everybody needs and wants a chance to do some switching. So
Yep.
I would try. And then, like I said, the Naples job, which everybody wants, I try to make sure that different crews get that job each time. And since it only runs the first session of the 3, it's a long time in between to run that job. So.
Got it. Okay. Well, I think that's the end of the questions. So again, Ken, thanks for presenting. Appreciate it. I'm going to stop the recording.